Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. We're presented by CLNS Media. Today on the show, we've got good friend of the program, Cole Zwicker, returning to the podcast. Cole has been a little bit under the weather since getting back from his long trip to Las Vegas. Vegas does it to us all, doesn't it, Cole?
Yeah, I wish I could really blame it on Vegas on this one. That'd be the easy out. I kind of took it easy down there. I think I only went out one night or so. I went out with Sharks for dinner really quick. But other than that, I was mostly in the gym and came back. And for some reason, just got hellaciously sick yesterday. I couldn't even get off the floor. So good to be back alive, man.
Yeah, like that's the thing. I didn't really go out at all this time when I was in Vegas. Like, last year or even 2 years ago, like I was out every night in Vegas. I was having a good time, just networking, talking to people, and going out with friends at the end of the day. But this year I tried to keep it low key. I didn't have more than 4 beers any night that I was out. So I was just like trying to be very, very quiet. And I still, by the end of my trip, I was there for 4 days, just felt like dying. It happens every time.
The weather was just absolutely excruciating, and I was staying pretty close. I was in an Airbnb, like right next to the arena, and just walking there in like 7 minutes, I was already melting. So all day basketball watching, more fatigued than you'd think as far as sitting through like 5 different games. That adds up pretty quickly. Well,
it's 5 different games. It's in just miserable heat because like even though the gym is air conditioned, it also is just like somehow like the dry heat like seeps in and just makes you feel it while also being cold. It's the most bizarre feeling being in that gym.
I totally agree.
On this podcast, we're recording back-to-back podcasts here. This one will be released today on Tuesday, which is July 17th, if I remember correctly. And then the next one will be released Thursday, July 19th. The first one we're going to run through a lot of the different free agency deals that have happened over the course, really of the last little, week and a half or so. And then the second podcast, we're going to do our big all-encompassing Summer League podcast, where we break down all of the players that caught our eye, all of the top picks who we're seeing for the first time, some of the second round standouts who we saw, like Mitchell Robinson and DeAnthony Melton. We're going to do that later on this week. The reason I'm recording 2 ahead of time is because I'm going to be crazy busy over the course of the later part of this week doing Adidas Summer Championships out here in Orange County, doing Cream of the Crop Tournament down here in Orange County as well. And then next week I'm going to Vegas. So again, to do AAU stuff. So it's that kind of year where I'm that time of year where I'm traveling around, and it's good to kind of get a few of these in the can. So let's talk about free agency first, but before we do that, I do just want to mention that our sponsors today are lightstreams.com and forhims.com. We'll give you a better rundown on those later on in the show. I think that the best place to begin here is that I want to go with the Bulls deciding to go in on Jabari Parker and Zach LaVine with their, just massive amount of cap space. Jabari Parker signs a 2-year, $40 million deal that essentially acts as a 1-year, $20 million deal because the Parker deal has a team option on the second year. And then the Zach LaVine situation was obviously the Kings signed him to a 4-year offer sheet that, if I remember correctly, is $78 million, right, Cole?
Yes, that's correct.
So $19.5 million on average. I believe that Casey Johnson in Chicago reported that it's a flat structure. So it's $19.5 every single season. And I think it also has like random or like balloon payments at the beginning of the year, right?
I didn't see that, but I wouldn't be structured like Otto Porter, where there's an upfront cost every year just to make matching more impractical, I guess, for the Bulls, even though that didn't obviously matter.
Yeah. So they decide to do that. The first question here is, what do we think of this strategy in general to go after, in this case, 2 high upside players who have shown pretty clear deficiencies in their game, whose deficiencies are actually quite similar, and, at the end of the day, though, do have relatively real upside for their games?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, from an offensive standpoint, both these guys have legitimate strengths. Jabari more so for me at the 4, and it sounds like he's going to play more of the 3, at least start there and swing to the 4 in certain lineups, certain matchups. You can see the shooting intrigue with LaVine. just the general athleticism, if Jabari is the same athlete that he was before, I think there's some definite intrigue on that side of the ball. It's just, for me, it's defensively. Like, how many wing combinations do we know that are this poor defensively where it actually works out for the rest of the team? Lauri Markkanen was a better defensive player than I thought he was going to be last year. I still don't think he's great. I think he's more like maybe average. You're just putting a lot of strain on Chris Dunn and Wendell Carter, Robin Lopez in these lineups because, again, I don't know if there's really a lot of precedent for wings that are this poor defensively. You're higher on Jabari than I am. What did you think of this deal?
So, yeah, I wrote a big thing about it at The Athletic. I think it made sense for Milwaukee to move on. You can make the case whether or not they should have traded him at the deadline maybe. But I think that they wanted to try and give him a chance, give him a final look with this group of players, right? With this core that they have assembled of Chris Middleton and Giannis Antetokounmpo and even like Eric Bledsoe to an extent. You can make the argument that they should have dealt him instead of trying to get that last look, but I'm ultimately pretty okay with trying to get that last look. What did you think?
It didn't bother me too much. I mean, you never want to lose somebody for nothing, but I've been pretty, upfront about looking at maybe something as not necessarily a sunk cost, but not doubling down. If you don't think Jabari is that guy, and let's be honest, if Giannis wanted Jabari on the Bucks right now, I think he would be on the Bucks, frankly. Like, if Giannis went out of his way to say, like, I want to build, I want to be, next to this guy moving forward, I think that there's a good chance that Jabari is still a Buck. So I don't like the mentality of looking at Jabari as like, oh, he's a pedigree pick. Number 2, we have to re-sign this guy no matter what. I think you have to look to move on at times as well. So I commend the Bucks for that. Even though ideally, I think you're right, you would like to have traded him at the deadline. I'm not sure how realistic those offers were. Yeah. Again, this guy was coming off an injury. What could they really have captured for him? Maybe that sample that, like you noted down the stretch of the season, was more valuable to the Bucks than what their offers they were receiving. But I like the fact they didn't double down and make like a mistake potentially just because Jabari is a high pedigree guy.
Well, yeah, and at the end of the day, this is a team that I think sees a window in the Eastern Conference with LeBron James gone. They have the best player in the East now in Giannis Antetokounmpo. And Chris Middleton is a very real number 2 next to Giannis. I think that they think they can make the Eastern Conference Finals next year. And they're not in asset accumulation mode. We're trying to build the best team around our genuine superstar over the course of the next 3 years. And, maybe you can say that, they should have just matched the contract that the Bulls were going to place in front of Jabari Parker instead of rescinding his qualifying offer and letting him go as an unrestricted free agent. I think that Chicago was going to place a 2-year, $40 million contract offer in front of Jabari, regardless of situation, whether it be a non-guaranteed year or a team option. But, at the end of the day, you have to do what I think is right. And I think that you can make the case, if you're Milwaukee, that signing Brook Lopez and Ersan Ilyasova is going to provide them more value over the course of 1 year than Jabari Parker would have for half the cost last year.
I think that's definitely an argument, and we have to factor in as well that the Bucks were hard capped when they signed Ersan. So if Jabari got this $20 million deal, I'm looking at their capture right now. I don't think that the Bucks actually could have even matched. If, of course, there would be different requirements as far as a 2+1 if he was still a restricted guy.
Yeah, but, I mean, like they could maneuver around. They could trade John Henson. They could trade Matthew Dellavedova. I think that the option was there for them to do so if they really wanted to. But I think the Ersan Ilyasova deal happening, right at July 1st kind of gave you a really good indication of where the Bucks were on this.
100%. I think that's really well said as far as they could have maneuvered. If they wanted to keep Jabari, he would have been on the team right now. I think that's the all-encompassing point.
So in that kind of case now, let's move forward and talk about the Bulls. I think it's a fine 1-year risk for the Bulls. I mean, it's not a good fit. I dislike so many aspects of it because he's going to be playing the 3 substantially. Not only do the Bulls have, Wendell Carter, Robin Lopez, and, Lauri Markkanen, who I think all 3 of whom are 5s, just straight up. Like, I understand that Lauri Markkanen can shoot off a movement and maybe you can play him as a 4-4 offensively, but I want that guy as like a switchable 5. If anything, defensively. Like you said, he was fine last year defensively, and he was always an underrated athlete at Arizona, I think, because of that scheme kind of holding him back defensively a little bit. But,
Yep.
at the end of the day, I think all three of those guys are fives, and we haven't even gotten to Bobby Portis, who I think is a really, really good player. Like, his skill set right now, being able to shoot from distance on a pretty high sample, like he shot 4 threes a game last year, if I remember correctly, and hit it at like 36%. He rebounds at a super high clip, and he actually has center size. I know he's not a great defender, but that combination of skills is very difficult to find out on the market. And he's realistically going to be like their fourth option at center right now.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think just getting back to Jabari, what do you think is the upside of this deal? This is really tenuous because you're juggling years. Like we talked about this in a past podcast. How many years do you want to give Jabari? You can't go like 3 or 4 because there's so much injury uncertainty. But at 1 or 2 at $20 million a year, where's the value coming? Let's say that he plays really well and they opt in the next year. I think you're just basically betting on him really improving these next 2 years, and maybe you resign him ultimately. Like I don't know if there's a lot of value on this contract, but again, it's a fine contract to me because, of course, it's a 1-year deal. It's a de facto 1-year deal. If it doesn't work out, they can cut ties. It's not like they're sinking their cap space long term. Yeah,
to me, there is actually quite a bit of value on this deal because you have to assume that because A, his agent is Mark Bartelstein in Chicago. They have that agency has a great relationship with the Bulls. And B, because it's Jabari Parker, Chicago basketball, I mean, realistically, high school legend in Chicago basketball at Simeon Academy. I'm sorry, not Simeon High School. It is a situation where I think you can expect if he plays really, really well, that the team is willing to go in on him long term. And if he's plays really well and the team is willing to go in on him long term, it wouldn't surprise me if you saw a scenario where they negotiate ahead of time before his option has to come up. And they can offer him up to $24 million a year next year if they want to decline the option and then, give him a new contract because they'll have his non-bird rights, which allows them to go up to 120% of what he got paid the season beforehand. I can't imagine Jabari Parker being worth more than that while he's still in his 0 to 6 era where you can only get 25% of the cap. So his most he could get even on the market is $26 million a year, if I remember correctly. So I would think that the relationship there makes this a little bit different than your normal situation where you're trying to create contract value here. I think if he plays well, there's going to be an expectation that he's going to sign long term there.
I think that's fair. Honestly, I just looked at kind of the surplus value element of this contract. It's hard for me to imagine him living up to $20 million this season. You have to overpay a little bit, of course, with a shorter term deal. I don't think there's necessarily a good answer on mind as far as, is this a great deal or not? I think it's fine. I understand the arguments for both sides. Ideally, I'd want to get him at like 13, 14 million. So you have a little bit of surplus value room in his contract. But again, then you're trading off the years, and that kind of diminishes that argument because if the years are fully guaranteed and you go 3 to 4 years into the future and the injury history, it continues to manifest on the floor and keep him out of games, I think that's the struggle here. So I'm fine with a 1-year deal as kind of a trial here. Again, like you noted, the fit is not ideal.
Yeah, so you mentioned what the upside of this deal is, right? I think the upside is that, again, Jabari Parker, if he gets back to 100%, which we can talk about in a second as well, I think the upside is he can still be an NBA All-Star. That is probably higher than where you are, right?
Yeah, it's possible. I'm not ruling it out at all. I just think, again, it comes down a lot to situation when you put in a position to succeed. I'm not sure if he's going to be that playing the 3 for the Bulls.
Right. So one thing that I wrote about within this, big thing that I wrote about at The Athletic was if you look back over the history of guys who were 22 and under, who averaged 20 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists on at least 56% true shooting, it's actually pretty remarkable, the guys who have done that before. You're looking at players like LeBron James, Giannis, Kevin Durant. I think Marquise Johnson is the worst player on that list, and he made 5 All-Star games. Charles Barkley, Adrian Dantley, Kevin Durant. I think I mentioned Durant. Magic Johnson is on this list. I think that Chris Webber did it over a pretty small sample in one of his years that he was within the first couple years of his career. So guys who put up this production early on in their careers, they obviously tend to get better. And I look at this as a situation where, yeah, Jabari's developmental curve is thrown off by all of this because of the injury history, but we also shouldn't consider him a finished product either. And I think that what happens there with those numbers is that it shows you that we shouldn't consider him a finished product, even if there are concerns about the injury history.
I think it's a fair argument, honestly. I mean, he definitely has talent as a scorer. I'm not going to take that away from him. I mean, he has rare ability, his explosiveness, his handling ability at his size, especially if he's playing a big position at the 4. I think it'd be valuable for sure. It just comes down to more like how much does his overall skill set contribute to winning with his defensive deficiencies, like we've talked about ad nauseum in the past. I think that there is some merit to this contract. I would just have rather seen him go to a team like the Jazz and be the 4 next to Rudy Gobert, and like you really get that optimization with him. You know what I mean? 'Cause then I'd be more willing to take maybe more of a calculated risk that he can be salvageable defensively if he's insulated. I'm not sure, even as good as Wendell Carter looked at Summer League defensively, I'm not sure if they have the infrastructure, especially when you're playing next to Zach LaVine. I can't think of another team that had 2 players like that on the wing who were as poor defenders as those 2 are, where it really worked. But I think Jabari can score, and I think that he's going to put up production. He's going to put up numbers. We'll just kind of see how much it contributes to winning for Chicago.
Yeah, no, I'm there with you on this. Like the fit is concerning because they are going to be the worst defensive team in the NBA next year. Like they have a legit all defense level guard in Chris Dunn. They have a really, really good defensive center in Robin Lopez. We can see how good Wendell Carter is early in his NBA career. I think that the early indications from Summer League, as we'll talk about on the next podcast, were good. But man, that wing position is going to be a problem. It's going to be a significant problem. And then if they try and play Lauri Markkanen and Wendell Carter down a position at the 4, and Bobby Portis as well down at the 4, it's just going to lead to less mobility. And it's going to be hard for them to, I think, contain any sort of penetration. And it's going to be hard for them to play any sort of realistic off-ball defense.
That's what I'm most worried about is the off-ball defense. Point of attack, I think they'll be okay in like a 1-5 pick and roll because their 2 best defensive players are probably going to be involved in that action. Chris Dunn is a great point guard defender, like you said. I think they're big defenders at the 5. They play Wendell there. Robin Lopez is a good defensive player. It's just more of the off-ball stuff because that's where both LaVine and Parker really, really struggle is with like staying focused, allowing back cuts. It's really hard to be a good defensive team in the modern game if you don't have wings that are at least above average defensive players who can switch a little bit. And I have my druthers about both LaVine and Parker there.
Yeah, so if I was the Bulls in this scenario, I've been thinking about this a lot recently. Like, how would I have attacked this offseason? I understand that Wendell looks great, but I probably would have just taken like Shea Alexander or Mikal Bridges at 7 and tried to shore up the wing position. If I knew that Parker was going to be like a genuine option for me, like I think that they probably did know that going into the offseason, like just generally given the relationships there. I probably would have just not taken Wendell Carter and would have taken someone different. And I think that if you do that, it just opens up a much easier fit for a potential Jabari move.
Yeah, I just think that Wendell's a way better player than Jabari is. So I guess that's just a talent evaluation.
Well, I guess the thing is, though, is he a much better player than Mikal Bridges or Shea Alexander, though?
I think he's better than Mikal. Shea was really good in Summer League. We'll talk about that in the next podcast. I still think Wendell's the better prospect, but he would make me think maybe twice about that. But again, I think that just approaching it from a value standpoint, I would just take the best player available in the draft, and then you figure it out. I'm not sure if Jabari really shifts the calculus for me as far as team building. Obviously, it's not optimal now, but I think that they made the right choice at the time and in retrospect. The wings, I mean, it's hard to get wings in free agency. We've talked about the value of wings and getting them through the draft. We'll see what Hutchinson becomes. That's going to be big for them as far as his development goes. So that's a key piece that we haven't really touched on that might shift the calculus for them. If he can be a plus defensive player, he certainly has the tools. We'll see if he has the off-ball awareness. That's going to be a big piece for them. Yeah,
no, I agree with that. Let's talk about LaVine real quick. I think who told me this? I think Robbie Calland told me this deal at Summer League, and I was in shock. I just looked at him, and it was reported as 4 years, $80 million at that time. So it was like $480. They gave him $480. Like Sacramento has 2 shooting guards that are better than he is in Buddy Hield and Bogdan Bogdanovic. Like, would you agree with that?
I mean, it's definitely. I think Bodong is definitely better than him. Buddy is more like they're kind of similar overall. I think they give you similar qualities. I would probably take LaVine's upside, but I think I agree with you that right now you can make an argument that they're both like very, very similar.
Yeah. So I was shocked when Sacramento did this deal. I was prepared to just thrash Sacramento in a write-up on this thing, but the Bulls matched. It's a much better deal for Chicago than it is for Sacramento, I think. I can actually see a world where LaVine lives up to this deal, but it's still a pretty big overpay based off of what we saw when LaVine came back last year. And the same goes for Parker too. When Jabari came back last year, his bounce was not there. You look at the numbers on what he shot in transition. He shot 63.8% in transition compared to 70% the year before. He shot 56.5% in the half court the year before, as opposed to 50% at the basket whenever he came back last year. There are real concerns about Jabari's bounce, and I think you could say the same about LaVine.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair. I don't know what I was more surprised about, honestly, the LaVine offer originally or the fact that the Bulls matched within 2 hours. Because we were all at Summer League and we were finding this out in quick succession. It was just kind of surprising overall. But the Kings, that was kind of a saving grace that the Bulls matched. I mean, the Kings were on pace to make the most athletic team of the modern era is a terrible defensive team. They would have been awesome in transition offensively, but man, that would have been kind of a nightmare infrastructure. It's tough to see, unless LaVine really takes legitimate steps as a creator for others or defensively. It's tough for me to see him living up to $20 million a year. I don't know if there's a ton of upside in this contract because you're already kind of pricing out his maximum value almost. There's no really room for him to grow. So
yeah, I agree. I think this is his max value. I don't think he exceeds this contract. You can see a world where he lives up to it reasonably, but that's it.
Yes,
I don't think that he will exceed it.
And I worried a little bit if this is more of a political move, and who's really to know after the Jimmy Butler trade, you're trying to recoup a player that you traded for. But I thought that Lowry hitting last year took a little bit of the pressure off in that deal because, Lowry proved to be a useful player last year as a rookie, and I think that already gives them some value in the Jimmy Butler trade. Chris Dunn took some steps last year too, so I didn't. If that was a lot of the reasoning for matching him is they just wanted to live up to that trade kind of. I don't really agree with that philosophy because I think that goes into what we talked about with Jabari a little bit in the Bucks, and just sometimes it's better just to move on. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, if you get Chris Dunn and Lauri Markkanen for Jimmy Butler, you're probably pretty happy about that, right? Yeah, you're not getting fair value in these superstar deals. At least they got something, right? They got something of substance. Yeah, no, I think that would have been actually fine. And if you let LaVine go on a bad deal, that's fine. Let's move on. We think the Bulls are they've been talked about as this potential 8 seed in the East, and I think a lot of that has to do with people thinking the East is just going to be like a dumpster fire next year. I don't think the East is going to be a straight up disaster. I mean, I think that the team that finishes 8th probably still wins 40 games. Yeah, I think they might be in the conversation. The defense is going to be a huge hindrance, in my opinion, overall. And you're asking, I know it's Hoiberg's offense, so it's not straight 1-5 pick and roll, but I think you're asking a lot of Chris Dunn on this roster as far as a creator for others, because Jabari and LaVine don't really do that at a high level. They're more self-creators and kind of floor spacing types and score types that can be ball stoppers. And Dunn has to take another progression in his point guard development, I think, to make this work. Yeah, I agree with you there for sure. Just for reference, the 8th seed in the East last year won 43 games. I mean, I don't think Chicago gets to 40 wins. That's a 13-win improvement. Yeah, I would bet heavily against that. Yeah, so fine deals. I mean, the Parker deal I like more than the LaVine deal because term isn't as big of a deal, but I also just like Jabari better as a player than Zach. So, sure. Sure, Chicago, do your thing. They do still have cap space next summer. They didn't ruin themselves with the LaVine deal. They still have the flexibility, but I don't know. Not a huge fan of all of this for Chicago. Let's talk about the Grizzlies real quick. So the Grizzlies completed a trade for Garrett Temple this morning for Ben McLemore, Deontay Davis, and a 2021 second-round pick. Thoughts on that deal before we go further? I actually think it's a pretty good deal for both. I agree with you. I think that it's a sensible deal for both sides. With the Kings, you get the 2021 second rounder, which could be a high-level second-round pick. I mean, we don't know what the future with Memphis is going to be with Conley and Gasol. They have Jaren Jackson, and that's really their only young core piece moving forward. You can say Kyle Anderson as well, but I'm not sure how much he really moves the needle as far as being a competitive team. But I liked it from Memphis' part. They got Temple, who can help them immediately right away. He was the best player in the trade that can really help them this year. Like, if things go right for Memphis and they're healthy, I think they can make the playoffs. That's a big if, though.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to, Marc Gasol and Mike Conley. If those two are fine, the Grizzlies will be fine. And I think that they absolutely compete with teams like Denver and with teams like, New Orleans and even Minnesota, maybe. Minnesota's so hard to judge because, they were on pace for like 52 wins or so before the Jimmy Butler injury. So do we think that can shift the needle for them at all? I'm getting Jimmy for like 82 games versus I think he played like 60 last year. Is that right?
I don't know off the top of my head, but yeah, I think that Minnesota, that's exactly the point on, is that how much they have Butler, because he's really the engine that drives that team as much as, people give credit to Towns and Wiggins. I think Butler's the guy.
Yeah, so I look at Memphis as a team that could legit make a pretty big leap next year. I know that they only won 22 games last year. I would expect them to win 40 games next year.
I think I'm with you. I'm always like cautiously optimistic with Memphis just because I do like Mike Conley so much. Marc Gasol, those guys are entrenched veterans. I like what they did with Kyle Anderson. I thought that was a savvy move. It just seemed kind of like Hollinger is calling. Maybe he has more weight in decision making. I think Jaren Jackson was kind of like a more analytical pick in several respects at 4 than Kyle Anderson. We'll kind of see how it all comes together for them if Jaren Jackson give them good minutes at the 4. I think that they have a decent team that actually makes more sense now, especially like Temple's not like an impactful player, but I think just getting a rotation wing like that is big.
Yeah, so they also get Kyle Anderson 4 years. What was it, 37, right?
Yes.
So gets the full mid-level exception. The Spurs decide not to match that contract, and they went from having the worst wing rotation in the NBA last year. Like, I think it's pretty fair to say that, given that Wayne Selden was their best wing last year, to having what is resembling a pretty competent one. Like, I'm not going to say that they have a plus wing situation, but Garrett Temple, Kyle Anderson, you slide Wayne Selden back to like a third wing role. Maybe you get like stretch 4 minutes from Chandler Parsons. You'll obviously get some stretch 4 minutes from Jaren Jackson. Overall, this is now resembling like a very real, interesting situation on the wing.
Exactly right. And I think that you go from a really bad situation to one that is maybe salvageable, and you're building around, you have your 2 core pieces of a point guard and center. If you can get legitimate play, maybe not impactful play, but average-ish play from the wings, I think that's a huge benefit for them.
Yep. Again, I think they're a pretty real contender to make the playoffs next year. They're a team that, like, you talk to folks around the league and they're like, nah, I don't think they can literally double their win total from last year. And the Lakers are going to be a lot better, obviously. The Clippers, I think, are probably going to be about the same as they were, right around 500. The Nuggets are, hoping to make that leap into the playoffs, I would say more than like a guarantee to do so. So there's some skepticism there, just given the uncertainty around Kawhi as well in San Antonio. But
yeah,
I with Mike Conley, with Marc Gasol playing 70 plus games, which, maybe that's a myth at this stage, but that's obviously what they're hoping for. If those two guys play that many games, they're right in that mix. I think they really are.
I think they're definitely in that group, and it's hard to predict health, of course. That's like one of the hardest things to predict. And it seems like you should probably skew more in the negative as far as projecting Conley and Gasol, at least both of them, to stay healthy. Like, if they lose Conley, they're screwed. Like, they absolutely have to have him. If they lose Gasol, it might be a little bit more salvageable, but it's still a negative, right? So it just comes down to how healthy those guys are and for how many games.
Yeah, no, I agree. First ad of the podcast here. If you're thinking about saving money this summer, why not start by paying less interest on your credit card balances? Refinance with a credit card consolidation loan from Lightstream. It is an easy way to save hundreds to thousands of dollars and lower your interest rate. Lightstream offers credit card consolidation loans from 5.89% APR with autopay. It is lower than the average credit card interest rate of over 18% APR. You could go get your funds as soon as the day you apply. Lightstream believes that people with good credit deserve a great interest rate and no fees. So say goodbye to high interest credit cards this summer and start saving with Lightstream. This is a really, really great product, and I can absolutely tell you that it works really, really well. My listeners can save even more with an additional interest rate discount on top of Lightstream's already low rates. The only way to get this discount is to go to lightstream.com/theory. lightstream.com/theory, THEORY. This is subject to credit approval. Rate includes 0.50% auto pay discount. Terms and conditions apply, and offers are subject to change without notice. Visit lightstream.com for more information. I want to talk to you about remaining free agency targets, because right now I think there are 4 that really interest me. Clint Capela, Marcus Smart, Rodney Hood, and Montrezl Harrell. I don't think Capela is going to go anywhere. Do you? Like, it's possible he signs a deal, but I would be surprised if he ends up leaving, right?
I would bet heavily against him leaving. And I think that he's probably going to get a deal worked out with Houston. We've kind of seen these negotiations sometimes drag into even September. We saw that with Tristan Thompson with the Cavs. I think that eventually Houston and Clint get something worked out. But even if he does sign, let's say the Kings somehow offer him like whatever the remaining cap space is or something, if they want to get another center. And hypothetically, I mean, they probably won't because of Harry Giles' summer league performance and all that. The Houston probably matches. I think they have to. Their moves this summer indicate that they basically are going to match anything. They didn't pay Ariza because of luxury tax issues. So I think that the overwhelming favorite is for him to return to Houston in some capacity.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Marcus Smart is in a really interesting spot. I think he strikes me as the most likely out of all of these players to take the qualifying offer.
I think I'm with you there. It makes a little bit more sense with him just to wait until 2019 free agency, depending on what the offers he's receiving are. If he thinks he's a $15 million a year player, that might be worth it for him long term, even though we rarely see this recourse. A guy like Capela, though, he's probably getting like 4-year, $80 million offers. It's very hard to turn down $80 million guaranteed to accept a qualifying offer. But Marcus Smart might just bet on himself and bet on a better market next summer.
Yeah, no, I think that I am with you there, unless a team like Sacramento decides to come over the top. I think Sacramento is the last team that has the cap space to do this. If they come over the top with like a $14 million a year offer, he should take that. But I don't know that they're going to do that.
That's kind of an interesting fit, too. I mean, they definitely need somebody who defends. The lack of shooting with him and Fox, of course, it's not a perfect fit, but kind of from just a general approach, a leadership aspect, he plays really hard. I think that Sacramento could actually use him as more of a 3. They don't really have like a dynamic 3 defender, and I think Marcus can definitely guard most every 3 in the league with his strength level. So that's something to look at. I'm not sure if you want to pay Marcus Smart $14 to $15 million a year. That's probably on the upper end of what I would be willing to do, but I really like the player.
Yeah, no, I love the player. Again, that would be paying for upside versus trying to get like a bargain on free agency. But sometimes you have to do that in free agency. Rodney Hood is at least like interesting, just as an upside kind of guy. But I mean, obviously, I think there's a pretty real concern there.
Yeah, and to delineate him from a guy like Smart with the Kings, like I wouldn't offer Rodney Hood like $16-17 million a year if I was the Kings. I just don't. He's too much redundant with what they already have, and being more of a 2 guard who doesn't play defense. I mean, they don't need that player in that team. So with him, I'm taking more of a conservative approach.
If I was the Cavs, I would probably consider signing him to just like a 4-year deal worth $10 million a year. I think he probably has to take that, right?
That's really interesting, because then we're getting into potential surplus value contract area where you can see him outperforming $10 million a year. If it's like $8 to $10 million, I actually wouldn't mind that much if you lock him up long term, and that's the trade-off is more years, but you get maybe some leeway as far as if he does improve, if you get that upside, then he can exceed that contract.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're Rodney Hood, you're coming off of just being benched in the playoffs. And your year in Utah, even before that, was shaping up as not a great year, to be honest. I mean, like, they were more than happy to get rid of him to get Jay Crowder. Like, if you give him $9 million, you give him, 4 years, $40 million, something like that, starting at $9 million a year. That is something that he probably has to take, right? Just because, like minimize his downside.
it's life-changing money. I mean, we see how fleeting that can be sometimes. It's not a perfect comparison, but like look at Isaiah Thomas now. He's playing for the minimum. Like anything can happen in the league, especially with, Rodney Hood's trajectory is not exactly the best.
There's a chance that deal is bad for Cleveland.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's definitely downside risk there as far as guaranteed money long term. And I think that he has to really entertain that. If he thinks he's a $15 million a year player, maybe he is. But there's a lot of outcomes to where he misses on a potential, $40 million payment, and he's stuck playing for maybe like the mid-level or something next year for 1 year, or even if he gets that. It's more of a tenuous situation than he probably believes it is.
Yeah. The last guy is Montrezl Harrell. I think Harrell is the guy that I see as most likely to be playing elsewhere next year. If I was a team that had my taxpayer mid-level exception and felt that I needed a backup center and someone who I think can actually step in as a starter and play really, really well, I would probably try and sign him to a 4-year deal worth all of that money.
I would even probably go a little bit higher as far as maybe the non-tax.
I would too, for sure, to be clear, but continue.
Yeah, I think that we're on the same wavelength here. If you can lock that guy into multiple years, I don't know how much the Clippers want to sacrifice their cap space moving into the future. And this is the kind of contract I think they can have value, because Harrell is going to have value in the playoffs as a switch guy defensively. He brings a very rare skill set as a backup five with his general athleticism, his rim running ability. He's a good player. And I think if you can get somebody like that under contract for multiple years, that's one of the things we talk about with surplus value contracts, is that looks like it could potentially pay dividends down the road as maybe a spot starter and someone who actually has some value in the playoffs.
Yeah, 11 points per game last year on I think it was like a 65 true shooting percentage, like right around there, 64.7 true shooting percentage. Now that I look at it, he can also, as you mentioned, switch defensively. 3.4% block rate isn't great. He's not like an elite rim protector, because realistically he's a little bit below 6'8" in terms of height, but he's super strong. He's very long. He's the kind of guy that I think at 4 years, $25 million, maybe 4 years, $30 million. That's a deal that the Clippers probably don't want to match because they want to maintain their cap space, but that you can actually get real value on.
Yeah, I mean, 425, 430. Sign me up for either one of those. I'm running to the damn podium to sign him to that. And we'll see. Maybe the Clippers do match, because they kind of been in asset accumulation mode. They're keeping some of their guys, and I think they're just trying to accumulate as many assets as they possibly can. But that's tough. When you start going to 4-year talk, if they want to obtain more flexibility, maybe they don't match. It's definitely worth offering.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. He's like worth real money, though. Like, I think he's probably better than Rodney Hood.
I think I agree with you.
I think that's about it. You don't have anyone else that's super interesting on the free agency market, right?
Not really. I mean, you're going more into like the Patrick McCaws, the Tyrone Wallaces, Yogi Ferrells. I don't know if there's that much really left on the market overall. Like David Nwaba is kind of interesting. I think that he's another guy that I would pursue. They announced him, right? So he's unrestricted, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so
the Rockets should go sign him.
Yes, they absolutely should. Or like they could work on a sign and trade with like the Pelicans or something. I would really like him as the 3 on the Pelicans. They need somebody with that kind of defensive versatility. I think that'd be a really intriguing fit.
Yeah, like I wonder if he's going to end up getting kind of boxed out and end up having to sign for the minimum.
And that's a great deal. I mean, if a team can get him for the minimum, if he could go to New Orleans and start for them playing for the minimum, that's an awesome contract.
Yeah. Like I don't think he's worth that. I think he's probably worth like $5 million a year. He's actually really good. But I just wonder if we're at the stage where not enough teams can create a marketplace for him.
It's reasonable. I think that if you can get him again this late in free agency, if you can get him for the minimum contract, every team in the league should be interested in that.
Yeah, and I mentioned the Rockets here. The Rockets, I mean, they lose Trevor Ariza and Luc Richard Mbah-a-Moute. They do sign James Ennis to replace him. They also sign Michael Carter-Williams, which, sure, okay. It's not like a fully guaranteed deal. It seems like they're in kind of a wait-and-see mode there as well. But they have DeAnthony Melton, who looked great in Summer League. Vince Edwards looked okay in Summer League. You know, Gary Clark is signed to a 2-way contract already. I am a little bit worried, though, that they haven't done enough yet to rebuild the depth that they need.
And they probably have Melo coming in, so that's going to be a liability against the Warriors, especially I don't think him and James Harden on the floor together defensively is tenable against the Warriors with all their off-ball movement stuff. So it's kind of a weird offseason for the Rockets. I don't like a lot of their moves. I mean, of course, it seems like a lot were motivated by paying the tax and not wanting to go too deep in, like matching Ariza's 1-year deal, even though if they're trying to win outright, losing Ariza is not the way to do that.
It's killer.
losing Mbamute, as much as he struggled against the Warriors in that series, I just think having a guy with that kind of defensive versatility who can make a corner three, that's valuable. And losing those guys and replacing them with Michael Carter-Williams, who I know has played good defensively against the Warriors in the past, but he's a complete non-shooter. Is he even tenable on the floor against them? And then Carmelo, like DeAnthony Melton's their best offseason move. And as much as I love the guy, like, is he really going to be able to give you like high level minutes in like the Western Conference Finals right away? Maybe, but I think that's a lot to be riding on a second round pick.
Yeah, I don't think he can do that like immediately, to be honest. But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
James Ennis, I think, is a good deal for them, though. Like, he is 6'7".
Agreed.
He can shoot threes. Reasonable defender at least. He's athletic, so I understand that move at least.
That was the one that made the most sense for me because he can shoot and he's not bad defensively. He's more like maybe average to above average. He's not as good as Ariza. It's definitely a downgrade, but I think for the money that they had and were willing to spend, that is the deal that was most logical for me.
Nemanja Bjelica is going overseas now. He has decided to just spurn the offer that the 76ers put in front of him. He is just staying in Europe. No, do we have an idea where he's going yet? I actually don't know.
I don't either. I don't think that's been reported. It's just he was having visa issues, I guess, getting back into the country, and then decided I had to get like a physical or something, and then he just decided to stay in Europe. So I don't know if there's any update as far as what team.
Yeah, so like Bjelica is 30 years old. He is a former EuroLeague MVP. He got the full, I believe, room exception, right?
Correct.
So that was going to be like 3.3. Or no. Room is 4.4. Biannual is 3.3. So
yes, exactly.
Yeah. The thing is, though, that I would venture he will get more than that in just like real dollars in Europe because, like I said, he is a proven track record of genuinely being the best player in Europe. 4.45 seems like a lot, but you have to remember that in Europe, the money isn't taxed at nearly the highest level that it is in America. If he even gets like a $2.5 million offer from a team in Europe, he's probably, after accounting for living situation that the team will provide, after accounting for all of the amenities that teams will provide, he's probably taking down more money than he would have playing in Philadelphia next year.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I don't think this is a big loss for Philly. I mean, Bjelica, I like him as a player a lot, but you can argue that Philadelphia's deepest position is at the 4. You can play Ben Simmons there, Dario Saric, getting Wilson Chandler, who's probably more of a 4 at this stage anyway. They're fine there. What they need more is guys who can guard. Maybe there's an opportunity cost in free agency because you locked Bjelica up with the room exception, and then other guys went off the board after that. I don't know if the opportunity cost is going to be big. This is a another David Nwaba potential destination as far as just getting a guy who can really defend, because that's what they need. Right, we saw that against the Celtics. Like the Celtics wings made Philly's wings look obsolete in a lot of different ways and a lot of different times. In that athletically, they need a guy who can really switch and guard. That's why I understood them pursuing Zaire Smith, but Nwaba for even the room exception for 1 year, I think that actually makes more sense for them than Bjelica did.
I wonder if you could get him for like 2.4 even, and then save like $2 million of the room exception for later in the year for when like the buyout market comes out. Like having just a bit of that, like a little bit extra, might help them in the buyout market.
Yeah, I think that's actually the way to do it. For as little as you can get a guy like Nwaba and then have the rest left over for buyout, if you can just outbid some of the other contenders, I think that's probably the way to do this.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I really, really like that idea for them. Second ad of the show here is from forhims.com. 66% of men lose their hair by the age of 35. The thing is, though, that once you start to notice hair loss, it's too late. It's a lot easier to keep the hair you have than to replace the hair you've lost. If that hairline is slowly starting to move backwards, it is time to go to forhims.com, a one-stop shop for hair loss, skincare, sexual wellness, and it's for men. Thanks to science, baldness can be optional. Hims connects you to real doctors and medical-grade solutions to treat hair loss, well-known generic equivalents to name-brand prescriptions to help you keep your hair. These aren't snake oil pills or gas station counter supplements. They are prescription solutions backed by real science. You don't have to go to a waiting room. You don't have to deal with awkward doctor visits. You can just save hours by going to forhims.com, and it's very, very easy. It's a really, really great product. As someone who is quickly losing hair, not even slowly. This is a really, really excellent deal that I'm about to offer you. If you order now, my listeners get a trial month of Hims for just $5 today while supplies last. See the website for full details. This would cost hundreds if you went to the doctor or a pharmacy. Go to forhims.com/game theory. That's forhims.com/game theory, GAMETHEORY, forhims.com/game theory. Denver got under the tax by moving Kenneth Faried, Darrell Arthur, Wilson Chandler, as we mentioned in that last little segment here. I mean, do we care? Do we care about that? Are these important moves?
I will say that pick protection is kind of interesting here with top 12 next season. I kind of thought they might just stay over the tax, frankly, and not surrender a first-round pick because they were able to get off Wilson Chandler without incurring any kind of substantial trade-off. I thought that was a good move for them as far as shedding tax dollars without having to give up a first. So for me, that's what it comes down to. I know that the Nuggets probably don't need another first-round guy, having Michael Porter essentially as a redshirt guy. He'll be their de facto, I guess, first-round pick next year. That was just kind of curious. I thought that they were low enough. I mean, it was still going to be a hefty tax payment, but it didn't seem like insurmountable like it did before. So giving up a first in that situation, great job by the Nets. I mean, the Nets, I know you're a fan of the Nets front office as well. They're really good.
Yeah, no, they're absolutely tremendous. I mean, at the end of the day for Denver, this only just kind of saves them money, right? This just saves like Kroenke sports and entertainment money. But that's a reality of today's NBA. Like, if them staving off the repeater tax for another year saves them from having to lose one of their core pieces down the road, it's something you got to do. And it's something you have to consider every single time that, these decisions come up. And, they have enough young players. They have their youth movement in effect, right? Like, even off the bench, they have guys like Juancho Hernan-Gomez and Malik Beasley, who I think can be pretty useful. I think Monte Morris can be very useful for them at some point. You look at a guy like Tyler Lydon, sure, whatever. They have Trey Lyles as well off the bench now, too. They have all of the young pieces they need, in addition to a core that is Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, and Gary Harris is your starters. And Michael Porter gets thrown into that mix somewhere as well. So I think losing a first-round pick for them isn't necessarily as big a deal as it would be for other teams. Now, you'd obviously like to maybe have that first-round pick in your back pocket whenever the trade deadline comes around, because that can be a real asset for them to actually go out and get something as opposed to pay to remove something from your roster. But I don't hate it as much as I thought that I could hate it.
I don't hate it either. It's understandable from certain respects. I just wasn't a huge fan of making kind of it's not really a non-basketball related move, because it is part of the business, getting under the tax and not paying, that exorbitant amount of extra capital. But at the same time, I'm always a fan of keeping a first round pick, especially when it's when it's for a non-basketball kind of purpose, I guess you could label it as. So
you can't say this is a win for them. You know what I mean?
That's what I'm getting at. It's not a win on their side. You can understand why they did it, and you can empathize with kind of their approach, but I don't know how much positive you can really say about it. Yeah. It's like, oh, great. I think a lot of fans care a lot if you get under the tax or not. It's like sometimes you can just pay the tax, but not every team is going to do that. Yeah, no, that is definitely true. And let's move on to Brooklyn here. Brooklyn has just had such a smart summer, from getting Joe Harris to a 2-year, $16 million deal that I think is going to be a bargain, to getting Ed Davis to mentor Jarrett Allen for a year. He's a really, really smart defender, really great teammate, just a great guy to have around. To this deal where they've added a first-round pick. They ended up getting $5 million back from the Dwight Howard contract that they acquired for Timofey Mozgov. So that created an extra bit of maneuverability for them as well, that allowed them to go out and do this deal to get this extra first round pick. It's just little moves that they make every single time out that has now set them up for a summer of 2019 where they have multiple max cap spots if they really want them. They have
D'Angelo Russell and Rondae Hollis-Jefferson entering restricted free agency. They have a remarkably low cap hold for unrestricted free agent Spencer Dinwiddie, who, he's going to be very, very popular on the market, but it seems like he's really, really happy in Brooklyn as well. And they're going to have 2 first-round picks on top of it, one of which could be very, very high if they end up not necessarily being as great as what they're hoping to be this year. So this has just been all around, over the course of the last 2.5 years, a great, great rebuilding job from Sean Marks and from this entire Brooklyn front office.
Very well-run franchise. You can kind of just tell that they know what the hell they're doing as far as bridging first from the CBA and, Joe Harris's contract, using that lower cap hold, waiting to sign Ed Davis with the room exception. Those guys don't count against the cap. Then being able to trade away Jeremy Lin to absorb the contract in this deal. Or from the Nuggets here. My question for you is, this is kind of interesting from Atlanta's perspective, because they took on Jeremy Lin. Why wouldn't they just have taken the capital from the Nuggets, if it existed, right? I mean, we don't know how relationships in the league play out. Sometimes teams like dealing with other teams. Why wouldn't Atlanta just have taken, Fareed and Arthur with the first-round pick? Wouldn't that be a better move for them?
Yeah, I wrote that in my analysis of that trade, and then, got a couple of calls around the NBA and was kind of reaching out myself trying to figure out why they wouldn't do that. No one really has the answer to that as to why they didn't do that. It made a lot more sense to me to just go ahead and take the asset, take the extra asset. You need assets. My theory on it is that Denver wanted to trade their 2019 first round pick because it's a weaker draft, and so that they can maintain flexibility in trades for their picks into the future. And Atlanta already has, if I remember correctly, 3 first round picks in the 2019 draft. One of which might not transfer because I think it's Cleveland's, and we don't really have any indication on how good Cleveland's going to be yet. So, I mean, maybe they didn't want a 4th first-round pick, but to me, that's silly. Just take the asset.
Well, yeah, and you can also, it gives you more leeway to maneuver around the draft, right? More first-round picks isn't bad because you can kind of move around the board, even though a lot of teams don't choose to do that. I would have just taken that. I mean, you take on Jeremy Lin. Clearly, they valued Jeremy Lin to some extent, getting him for the cost they got. But they already have Dennis Schroeder. They just drafted Trae Young. It's how much upside can he really give that team on an expiring contract?
Well,
I just don't.
The upside is that he gives them fans in the seats. Potentially, I think that
Fair.
might be a part of this calculus. Is Atlanta finished 30th in attendance last year? They have been known to be a relatively fickle fan base when the team is bad. And look, there are a lot of really great Atlanta Hawks fans. I don't mean to disparage them, but there's a lot to do in Atlanta, and the team just doesn't necessarily bring in fans whenever they are bad. And this is going to be a bad basketball team next year, just being realistic about it. So I do think that part of this is potentially trying to bring in Jeremy Lin to, kind of mitigate the losses that could happen due to decreased attendance next year.
I think that's the best explanation for this, even though I don't agree with the methodology. I would rather just take the first and then be able to give your fans something more in the future by getting just more versatility and more enhanced ability to, again, maybe you trade, it ends up being the 9th and the 13th pick or something, and you can trade up into the top 5 potentially in this next draft, if that's possible. Who knows what the options are, but I'm always for getting as many assets as possible, especially when the opportunity cost is getting, a point guard, even if for attendance for 1 year, when that's your most duplicative position already.
Yeah, and the Dennis Schroeder part of this is interesting too, just because I don't think that they want him on the team necessarily, just kind of given what their actions have been this summer, and I don't know that they're going to be able to deal him. Just straight up, I do not know that they can trade him. He has what could be at least a felony charge hanging over his head. He has diminishing returns in terms of his ability on the floor. I don't really know what to think here.
Yeah, and I'm with you. They don't seem like they want him, but I'm not sure if another team is. A lot of guys will pencil him to Phoenix. I don't think Phoenix wants a head case like that in their locker room.
For
They're
3
trying to
years.
get guys who would. Exactly right. $15.5 million. That's not a good deal. I don't see a lot of value, especially with all the negatives he brings that are ancillary and tangible stuff. A lot of teams aren't going to want this dude in their locker room.
Yeah, no, I agree. The last thing here I want to mention is Tony Parker to Charlotte. He goes with former Spurs head coach Jim Borrego over to the Hornets. I mean, going to be weird seeing him in a different jersey first and foremost, but I mean, second, do we think this is actually like a useful deal for the Hornets?
I don't know. What version, what iteration of Tony Parker are we getting? I mean, I get having a veteran behind Kemba Walker who can give them more minutes, because they really were so dependent on Kemba last year. When he went out, they were just a significantly worse team. I'm not sure if Tony Parker's the guy that's going to uplift them. If he still has anything in the tank, I don't think the deal is that negative. I mean, he does take some minutes from Malik Monk away from point guard if you wanted to try to play him more there as a backup. It seems like he's going to be more of the backup 2 now, for example, so maybe it hinders his development a little bit, but I don't really have a strong take on this outside of it's just going to be really fucking weird to see him in a Charlotte jersey instead of a San Antonio jersey.
Yeah, I mean, that part of it's weird, definitely. And I guess that, like, my next question is, like, they gave him 2 guaranteed years, right? Like, it is not a situation where the second year is non-guaranteed, right?
I think that's right. I think it was 2 years guaranteed.
So, why? If you're giving him $5 million already, I can't imagine he had another offer for that much already on the market.
Yeah, and I think for them, I mean, they might be just looking at. I agree from a negotiating standpoint. You're not getting value with that second year unless it's non-guaranteed, for example, or something like that, or a team option. You want to limit the years just in case it is a bad experience. But for them, they're probably like, we're going to be capped out anyway. They have no versatility as far as team building, so maybe an extra year for a backup point guard. If he does play well, $5 million could be a bargain in year 2. But I don't get a lot of the upside with this contract necessarily.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Cole, do you have anything else you want to talk about before we get out of here?
I think that's it.
All right, guys. We'll be back on Thursday with a podcast on Summer League. This has been the Game Theory Podcast. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, Android, Pocket Casts, Overcast, whatever podcasting app you're using. Please go on ahead and rate us that 5-star, 5-point, whatever rating it is that you're using to rate the podcast. Please go on ahead and make sure and do that. Really helps us move up in the ratings. We'll be back on Thursday. Like I said, we're going to have a really big Summer League blowout podcast. And until next time, we will talk soon. Bye.